Hey, it's Mrs. Wilson, and here is this week's reading assignment on personal narratives. Please make sure you have your digital notebook open so that you can take notes. All right, so I've got my notebook open to the week 5 tab. So please make sure you are taking notes along with us. So remember, if you click here, you can talk about personal narratives. I can type this morning. Okay, so personal narratives. So let's talk about what those are. As you learned in Unit 1, there are two major categories of writing, fiction and nonfiction. Fiction stories involve events and or people that are imaginary, while nonfiction relays factual information. So if fiction is made up, nonfiction is true. However, one category of nonfiction, literary nonfiction, tells stories about real events and people. Literary nonfiction texts sound very much like fiction stories because they both use literary elements to tell stories in an entertaining way. In this lesson, you will study personal narratives, a subgenre of literary nonfiction. A personal narrative is a first-person account of an event that took place in an author's life. Ooh, a definition. Let's get this one. So if you look at right here, a personal narrative is, so anytime that says this is, that's kind of your cue and notes to try to, maybe that's something I need to know. They didn't bold this one, so I'm surprised. So if we come over here to this page, you could even copy paste it. Is a first person narrative or first person account of an event in a person's life. We got the same size here. I like the two colors though. That way I know what the word is and then the definition. That helps me. So there's one note set up for us. Okay. You may be tempted to link that or think that a personal narrative is the same thing as an autobiography where they tell about themselves. However, there's an important difference. Rather than telling one's whole life story, a personal narrative focuses on just one important event and relates it in an interesting way. It's almost like you're gathered around the fires telling the story or sit and listen to the radio and the old radio stories. A personal narrative is basically a snapshot of a significant event in one's life. So maybe it's even like when you do the short videos on social media, like this is what's going on and here's why it's important, or oh my gosh, the drama. When you do your stories on social media, that's similar to a personal narrative. Because the personal narrative tells a story, it includes the literary elements of plot, characterization, setting, point of view, dialogue, and sensory details. Another hint, anytime you see those comma lists, like here when we have the plot, characterization, all those, that is a pretty good clue that that's something important because they're spending the time to go comma, 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 and lay that out for you. So if we're looking at our definitions in the notebook, personal narratives, we have that definition. This is also telling us that those personal narratives have these features. So this is something that we'll want to put in our notes. So we can, again, copy paste it. We can say they include, and we can put those things there. Again, you can play with the formatting on your own. I like making my stuff two-tone just so I know what is the definition and what is the, the important things I'm supposed to be looking at. So now we have two notes on our page. All right, so now we have the characteristics. So let's go through this short video and analyze it here. So click here to start. Oh, we have music. Genre. So we're looking at literary nonfiction. It's true, but it's in a story form. The purpose is to entertain and inform, so we want it to be interesting but factual. It's told in the first person as it happened to you. It's organized in chronological order, meaning the event happened in order. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. But it might have little minor flashbacks. Oh, that reminds me. And then you come back to present day. So those might be in there as well. Plot is just like we've been talking about. There's the exposition where you're explaining, the rising action, we're building up to it. We have the climax, the ultimate moment. Yes, that's a thing. Falling action and then resolution. There's some sort of conflict involved. And that we're leading up to it, getting to the high point of it, and then solving it. That's how we're going to write these narratives. There's dialogue. There's talking back and forth between characters. There's the setting. There's different characters in play. There's a plot. There's a reason. And there's an overarching theme that are included in this. It's very descriptive language. There's a lot of sensory language, like we did that core memories activity, using a lot of things that make you hear, taste, smell, all those in your head. And there's a lot of figurative expressions. We'll talk about those. The voice, it's written kind of in a way that reflects the personality of the author. I may use vocabulary that you wouldn't, or I may crack jokes in certain places, but that's my style. There's some of that in a personal narrative. It's personalized. Okay, and there's background and experiences. Okay, so let's go down here. The following text is an eyewitness account of the sinking of the Titanic. Although this text does not have all the characteristics of a personal narrative, it is a first-person account of a real-life event. Mrs. D.H. Bishop, a 19-year-old newly married woman, was one of the passengers fortunate enough to be rescued from the tragedy. She and her husband and 26 other passengers boarded a lifeboat 7 and were rowed to safety. And this is a count. Mrs. Bishop describes her observations of the sinking of the Titanic from the lifeboat. So she's actually watching that massive ship sink safely from a distance in the freezing cold weather in a lifeboat. We did not begin to understand the situation until we were perhaps a mile or more away from the Titanic. Then we could see the rows of lights along the decks begin to slant gradually upward from the bow. So remember, if you don't know about the Titanic, it kind of tips and then goes. Very slowly, the lines of the light began to point downwards to a greater and greater angle. The Titanic takes a little bit of time to sink, but once it does start to go, it goes quickly. The sinking was so slow that you could not perceive the lights of the deck changing their position. The slant seemed to be greater about every quarter of an hour. That was the only difference. In a couple of hours, though, she began to go down more rapidly. Then the fearful sight began. The people in the ship were just beginning to realize how great their danger was. When the forward part of the ship dropped suddenly at a faster rate, so that the upward slope became marked, there was a sudden rush of passengers on all decks towards the stern. It was like a wave. We could see that great black mass of people were in the steerage sweeping to the rear part of the boat and breaking through the upper decks. So what they're saying here is in this story, the boat's kind of up at this angle and everybody's racing to get up here towards where my elbow would be to be the furthest away from the water. At the distance of about a mile, we could distinguish everything through the night, which was perfectly clear. We could make out the increasing excitement on board the boat as the people, rushing to and fro, caused the deck lights to disappear and reappear as they passed in front of them. This panic went on, it seemed, for an hour. Then suddenly the ship seemed to shoot up out of the water and stand there perpendicularly, so it was almost standing straight up and down. It seemed to us that it stood upright in the water for 4 full minutes. So it's sitting here bouncing, and everybody's trying to get up towards the higher points. Then it began to slide gently downwards. Its speed increased as it went down head first, so that the stern shot down with a rush. So once the water filled up enough of that ship, it's just going to start going. The lights continued to burn till it sank. We could see the people packed densely in the stern until it was gone. So remember, everybody's huddled up at the top of that ship up there, trying to stay as far away from the water as possible. As the ship sank, we could hear the screaming a mile away. Gradually, it became fainter and fainter and died away. Some of the lifeboats that had room for more had gone to their rescue, but it would have meant that those who were in the water would have swam aboard and sunk her. So the people who were in the lifeboats, if they were all of a sudden swarmed by all those people in the water, it would sink everybody. So that's a decision. Do you go back and rescue them? There's a lot of drama in that little story. Okay? This factual account of the sinking of the Titanic is told using literary devices such as sensory language. The eyewitnesses to the scene, Mrs. Bishop, describe the setting and the action in chronological order from her perspective and the lifeboat. She uses descriptive details such as the angle of the lights on the ship and the sound of the screaming passengers, so as to recreate the scene in the reader's mind. Although the selection does not have an explicit theme, the last paragraph does imply a truth about human nature. Do you save yourself? Do you go back and try to save everybody? What do you do? As you can see, a personal narrative relates factual information about a significant event in an interesting way through the use of sensory language, description, plot development, and other literary devices. Think of it almost like a 30-minute TV show. You want to get people in, set the scene, have something happen, and then come to some sort of solution. The following passage is another example of a personal narrative taken from a much longer work about the sinking of the Titanic. This narrative includes the author's personal thoughts and reflections from his experience of being rescued from the sinking ship. Although the women and children were to board the lifeboats first, the author of this account, Lawrence Beesley, was permitted to board the lifeboat 13 just before it launched. Lawrence Beesley was a science teacher and writer and his novel about the experience was published 9 weeks after the tragedy, just a couple of months. So it was really still raw and fresh. Okay, so we're going to listen to this story. Please be paying attention and following along.
Looking back now on the descent of our boat down the ship's side, it is a matter of surprise, I think, to all the occupants to remember how little they thought of it at the time. It was a great adventure, certainly. It was exciting to feel the boat sink by jerks, foot by foot, as the ropes were paid out from above and shrieked as they passed through the foaming blocks. The new ropes and gear creaking under the strain of a boat laden with people, and the crew calling to the sailors above as the boat tilted slightly. Now it went in, now it went the other. Lower aft, lower stern, and lower together.
So the aft and stern, those are sea terms, like ship terms. That's front and back, basically. So they're saying lower the boats, lower this, lower that. Try not to teeter the people.
As she came level again. But I do not think felt much apprehension about reaching the water safely. It certainly was thrilling to see the black hull of the ship on one side and the sea, 70 feet below, on the other, or to pass down by cabins and saloons brilliantly lighted. But we knew nothing of the apprehension felt in the minds of some of the officers whether the boats and lowering gear would stand the strain of the weight of our 60 people. The ropes, however, were new and strong, and the boat did not buckle in the middle as an older boat might have done. Whether it was right or not to lower the boats full of people to the water, and it seems likely it was not, I think there can be nothing but the highest praise given to the officers and crew above for the way in which they lowered the boats, one after the other, safely into the water. It may seem a simple matter to read about such a thing, but any sailor knows, apparently, that it is not so. An experienced officer has told me that he has seen a boat lowered in practice from the ship's deck with a trained crew and no passengers in the boat, with practiced sailors paying out the ropes in daylight and calm weather with the ship lying in dock, and has seen the boat tilt over and pitch the crew headlong into the sea. Contrast these conditions with those obtaining that Monday morning at 12:45 a.m., and it is impossible not to feel that, whether the lowering crew were trained or not, whether they had or had not drilled since coming on board, that they did their duty in a way that argues the greatest efficiency. I cannot help feeling the deepest gratitude to the two sailors who stood at the ropes above and lowered us to the sea. I do not suppose they were saved. Perhaps one explanation of our feeling a little sensible than usual leaving the Titanic in this way was that it seemed a climax to a series of extraordinary occurrences. The magnitude of the whole thing worked events that in the ordinary way would seem to be full of imminent peril. It is easy to imagine a voyage of 4 days on a calm sea without a single untoward incident. The presumption, perhaps already mentally half realized, that we should be ashore in 48 hours, and so complete a splendid voyage, and then to feel the engine stop, to be summoned on deck with little time to dress, to tie in a lifebelt, to see rockets shooting aloft and call for help, to be told to get into a lifeboat. After all these things, it did not seem much to feel the boat sinking down to the sea. It was the natural sequence of previous events, and we had learned in the last hour to take things just as they came. At the same time, if anyone should wonder what the sensation is like, it is quite easy to measure 75 feet from the windows of a tall house or a block of flats, look down to the ground, and fancy himself with some 60 other people crowded in the boat so tightly that he could not sit down or move about, and then picture the boat sinking down in a continuous series of jerks as the sailors pay out the ropes through cleats above. There are more pleasant sensations than this. How thankful we were that the sea was calm, and the Titanic lay so steadily and quietly as we dropped down her side. I think we all learned many things that night about the bogey called fear, and how the face of the thing is much less than the dread of it.
Okay, so a little bit of context if you're not familiar with the Titanic. It was a massive, massive ocean liner that was billed as the unsinkable ship. You know, there's some foreshadowing. If you say it's unsinkable, you can probably imagine what's going to happen. They were so confident in that ship, there were not enough lifeboats on that boat to save everybody, not even close. So, and then the way the ship is settled, or they set the rooms up, the higher in the ship, the more expensive the rooms are. So the people that couldn't afford a lot were clear down on the bottom. So if you're imagining trying to get out of that ship, the poorer people were down towards the bottom and took the longest to get to the top. So in theory, or the way you're looking at it, mostly the wealthy people were the ones that are going to get off that boat. And some of the lifeboats weren't even full when they sent them away. So it's a catastrophic, massive issue. And it's one of the reasons we have the rules we have today, that you have to have enough lifeboats on board to be able to save everybody, because we're all need to be off that boat if it's sinking. Hello. Okay. So let's look at this here. This account includes both description of events and personal reflections of the disaster. So some of it reads very much like, a step-by-step event, but he also goes through and does that pause where he talks about how great those guys that were lowering the boats down were, because in other situations when they were training people, the boats would go like this and tip everybody over. So with a real boat going down, thankfully in calm seas, they were able to gently lower everybody down safely. So he kind of gives you that context of, those guys really did a good job, and I doubt they survived because they were the ones lowering everybody down. The author uses abundant sensory details to describe his experience of being lowered into the sea in the lifeboat. These descriptions help the reader to imagine that it would have been like to experience this event. The message or theme of the narrative is stated in the last paragraph of the selection. The facing of fear is much less than the dread of it. When you're in the moment, it's not as bad as the time leading up to it. If you know it's coming, you have all that time to worry about it. But he said it's kind of easier when you're in the moment, you just deal with it. Okay, so you have the reading questions below. I'm going to go through and read them one by one. You're welcome to hit pause in between and answer them. I will not be giving answers. I'm not that nice. So let's see what you can do. True or false? There is nothing similar between fiction and literary nonfiction. Hit pause, go look up your answer up in the passage. 2. A blank narrative is a first-person account of an event that took place in the author's life. Non-fictional narrative, biographical narrative, a personal narrative, or a chronological narrative. Press pause and check your notes. 3. A blank tells a person's life story, while a blank narrative focuses on just one event in the author's life. So your first choices are for the life story is an editorial, a personal, an essay, or a biography. And then a something narrative focuses on just one event. That narrative is an editorial, personal, essay, or biography. 4. The genre of blank nonfiction is the genre that personal narratives are written in: historical, literary, opinion, science, documentary. 5. Select the two purposes of a personal narrative. So what is their purpose? To discourage, to inform, to entertain, to persuade, or to confuse. Pick two. What is the point of view of a personal narrative? Third person omniscient, third person unlimited, first person, third person limited. Even if you're not sure of all of those, the definition's up in the text. You should be able to figure that one out. How is a personal narrative organized? Recursive order, spatial order, order of importance. Order of importance is twice, I guess. Chronological order. 8. Select the 5 literary elements found in a personal narrative. Characters, plot, thesis statements, statistical support, theme, setting, dialogue, closing argument. So remember, you're selecting 5 of these. And 9. True or false? The only language used in personal narratives is sensory language. True or false? The only language used in a personal narrative is sensory language. Okay, moving on. Harriet Jacobs was a girl who grew up in slavery with her parents, brother, and grandmother. Her mother died when Harriet was 6 years old, and it was then that Harriet became aware that she was a slave. Harriet became the property of her deceased mother's mistress. When Harriet was 12, her mistress died and left Harriet to become the property of her 5-year-old niece. Can you imagine? In the following narrative, Jacob recounts another tragic incident in her life, as well as the freedom of her grandmother. Jacobs uses the pseudonym Linda Brent in her narrative and changes the names of others involved in her story as well. So she changes the names, but the events are real. The New Master and Mistress, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Dr. Flint, a physician in the neighborhood, had married the sister of my mistress, and I was now the property of their little daughter. It was not without murmuring that I prepared for my new home, and what added to my unhappiness was the fact that my brother William was purchased by the same family. Wonder why she's sad that her brother was purchased too. Little sidebar. If you're struggling to read these, remember you have that read write extension. If you clicked here, you could turn this on and you have these lovely highlighter features. So if we selected this text and hit play.
When we entered our new home, we encountered cold looks, cold words, and cold treatment.
Now, I have the British guy on. There are different ones on there. I just like to hear the accent and it keeps me interested. If you hit this little menu and go to options, you can change it. I have UK English Daniel on there. If you go down here to the U's, oops, too far. You have US English Samantha, Ava, Allison, and Tom. You also have UK Serena and Daniel. So you have several English there, but you can also pull up English Karen and English Lee. So you have different options if it helps you pay attention. So let's go back to, let's try English Tom.
I had been there nearly a year when a dear little friend of mine was buried. I heard her mother sob as the cloth fell on the coffin of her only child, and I turned away from the grave, feeling thankful that I still had something left to love.
Little fast for me, so let's make an adjustment. Go to options. Let's slow them down a little bit. Let's go about 40. So love, let's try here.
I met my grandmother, who said, "Come with me, Linda," and from her tone I knew that something sad had happened. She led me apart from the people, and then said, "My child, your father is dead." Dead. How could I believe it? He had died so suddenly I have not even heard that he was sick.
Okay, so again, a little robotic, but a great option that I highly recommend. And there's also these lovely little tools that if you come over here and select something, you can go, boop, we're gonna go blue. And I like color coding too. So we could talk about one character in one color and another character in another color. So I'll go ahead and continue reading here. He had died so suddenly, I had not even heard that he was sick. I went home with my grandmother. My heart rebelled against God, who had taken me from my mother, father, mistress, and friend. The good grandmother tried to comfort me. Who knows the ways of God? She said. Perhaps they have been kindly taken away from the evil days to come. Years afterward, I often thought of this. She promised to be a mother to her grandchildren, so far as she might be permitted to do so, and strengthened by her love, I returned to my master's. I thought I should be allowed to go to my father's house the next morning, but I was ordered to go for flowers, that my mistress's house might be decorated for an evening party. So imagine, Dad just died, you've been sold, I gotta go buy flowers for a party. Scary. I spent the day gathering flowers and weaving them into festoons, while the dead body of my father was laying within a mile of me. What cared my owners for that? Were they merely a piece of property? He was merely a piece of property. Moreover, they thought he had spoiled his children by teaching them to feel that they were human beings. The blasphemous doctrine for a slave to teach, presumptuous in him, and dangerous to the masters. They wanted to keep their slaves ignorant and unknowing and controlled as much as possible, because if they were aware and educated, they would rebel. The next day I followed his remains to a humble grave beside that of my dear mother. There were those who knew my father's worth and respected his memory. My home now seemed more dreary than ever. The laugh of little slave children sounded harsh and cruel. It was selfish to feel so about the joy of others. My brother moved about with a very grave face. I tried to comfort him by saying, "Take courage, Willie. Brighter days will come by and by." "You don't know anything about it, Linda," he replied. "We shall have to stay here all of our days. We shall never be free." I argued that we were growing older and stronger, and that perhaps we might before long be allowed to hire our own time, and then we could earn money to buy our freedom. William declared that this was much easier to say than to do. Moreover, he did not intend to buy his freedom. We held daily controversies upon the subject. Little attention was paid to the slaves' meals in Dr. Flint's house. If they could catch a bit of food while it was going, well and good. I gave myself no trouble on that score, for on my various errands I passed my grandmother's house, where there was always something to spare for me. I was frequently threatened with punishment if I stopped there, and my grandmother, to avoid detaining me, often stood at the gate with something for my breakfast or dinner. I was indebted to her for all of my comforts, spiritual or temporal. It was her labor that supplied my scanty wardrobe. I have a vivid recollection of those linsey-woolsey dresses given to me every winter by Mrs. Flint. How I hated it! It was one of the badges of slavery. While my grandmother was thus helping to support me from her hard earnings, the $300 she had lent her mistress were never repaid. When her mistress died, her son-in-law, Dr. Flint, was appointed executor. When his grandmother applied to him for payment, he said the estate was insolvent or bankrupt, and the law prohibited payment. It did not, however, prohibit him from retaining the silver candelabra which had been purchased with that money. I presume they will be handed down in the family from generation to generation. My grandmother's mistress had always promised her that at her death she would be free, and it was said that in her will she made good the promise. But when the estate was settled, Dr. Flint told the faithful old servant that under the existing circumstances it was necessary that she should be sold. They were broke, I guess. That's still not right. On the appointed day, the customary advertisement was posted up, proclaiming that there would be a public sale of negroes, horses, and etc. And Dr. Flint called to tell my grandmother that he was unwilling to wound her feelings up by putting her up at auction, and that he would prefer to dispose of her at a private sale. Amazing. My grandmother saw through this hypocrisy. She understood very well that he was ashamed of the job. She was a very spirited woman, and if he was base enough to sell her when her mistress intended she should be free, she was determined the public should know about it. She had for a long time supplied many families with crackers and preserves. Consequently, Aunt Marthy, as she was called, was generally known, and everybody knew her, respected her intelligence and good character. Her long and faithful service to the family was also well known, and the intention of her mistress to leave her free. When the day of the sale came, she took her place among the chattels, and at the first call she sprang upon the auction block. Many voices called out, "Shame, shame! Who is going to sell you, Aunt Marthy? Don't stand there. There is no place for you." Without saying a word, she quietly waited her fate. No one bid for her. At last a feeble voice said, $50. It came from a maiden lady, 70 years old, the sister of my grandmother's deceased mistress. She had lived 40 years under the same roof with my grandmother. She knew how faithfully she had served her owners, and how cruelly she had been defrauded of her rights, and she resolved to protect her. The auctioneer waited for a higher bid, but her wishes were respected. no one bid above her. She could neither read nor write, and when the bill of sale was made out, she signed at the cross. But what consequence was that when she had a big heart overflowing with human kindness? She gave the old servant her freedom. So what is gratefulness? Okay, let's listen. Being grateful is an active expression, not a passive feeling. Being grateful is something you do. Okay, so let's answer the questions here. Select all the feelings and personal reflections Jacobs expresses about her new master and mistress. So looking at feelings and personal reflections. Is there gratitude, desperation, unhappiness, appreciation, or loneliness? Hit pause and go look for it. (11) Select all the thoughts and feelings the author expresses concerning the death of her father. Does she show bitterness? Is she angry? Is she shocked? Is there relief? Is there peace? (12) Select all that shows how the author characterized her grandmother. Oh, pardon my little alert there. Angry, hardworking, harsh, religious, selfish, kind, caring. Select pause and look up your answers. (13) Select all the literary elements the author uses in her narrative. Plot, dialogue, characterization, thesis statements, logical fallacy, sensory language, or statistical support. Press pause and go look up your answer. (14) What literary element is found in the following quote? When we entered our new home, we encountered cold looks, cold words, and cold treatment. Is that a metaphor, onomatopoeia, assonance, sensory language, or rhyme? Hit pause, go look up your answer. (15) What is the type of figurative language used in the following statement? I have a vivid recollection of the linsey woolsey dress given me every winter by Mrs. Flint. How I hated it. It was one of the badges of slavery. Looking at this. Is that assonance, metaphor, simile, rhyme, or onomatopoeia? Press pause and please look up your answer. 16. True or false? The message that can be taken from the final paragraph is that those who fight for the hardest get the farthest in life, no matter who stands in their way. True or false? The message that can be taken from the final paragraph is that those who fight the hardest get the farthest in life, no matter who stands in their way. Thanks for hanging out with me. Make sure you took care of your notes this week about personal narratives. Add any other things that you'd like to, but make sure you have those points, and I will see you in class. Bye.